The USS Ronald Reagan just turned around. 100,000 tons of American military power, nuclear-propelled, the most feared ship on the planet, and it ran, not repositioned, not conducted a tactical withdrawal, ran, from drones, from weapons assembled in sanctioned factories for a few $1,000s each. Let that land for a second, because what happened over the Strait of Hormuz last night didn't just end a battle, it may have ended an era. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through that gap flows roughly 20% of all oil traded on Earth every single day. Every barrel Saudi Arabia pumps, every tanker out of Kuwait, Iraq, and the UAE. It all passes through there. For decades, one thing kept that strait open for global trade. The carrier battle group, the American Navy, the implicit threat that if you touch this shipping lane, you face consequences no nation on Earth is prepared to accept. Iran touched it last night, and the carrier left. Here's what actually happened. In the pre-dawn hours, Iranian forces activated launch sequences from dozens of positions simultaneously, coastline sites, island platforms, mobile launch vehicles that had been quietly repositioning for weeks. They didn't fire 10 drones, they didn't fire 100, they fired 2,000. 2,000 loitering munitions filling the sky from multiple directions at once, some slow, some fast, some real. Some electronic ghosts designed to force American radar systems to burn through their intercept capacity chasing phantoms. The carrier battle group's defense architecture is extraordinary against conventional threats. Aegis combat systems, standard missiles, close-in weapons as the final layer. In any normal engagement, this is the most capable air defense system ever deployed at sea. But there's a mathematics problem no system can escape. When the number of incoming threats exceeds your simultaneous engagement ceiling, the extras get through. Iranian planners didn't need every drone to survive. They needed enough. They ran the numbers. They launched accordingly. The primary weapons were Shahed 136, Delta Wing, piston engine, built cheap and built in volume. At somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 per unit, you can flood a battlefield with them. The intercept cost on the American side runs hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars per engagement. You don't have to win the fight. You just have to make the fight too expensive to continue. Woven into the Shahed swarm were faster variants. The Shahed 238 with jet propulsion. When a defense system is tracking a dense cloud of slow targets and suddenly has to process a subset of significantly faster ones from different angles, the sequencing logic breaks. Windows open. At the same time, Iranian electronic warfare units were jamming communications between defensive system components, flooding GPS with interference, generating false radar signatures to pull intercept resources toward targets that didn't exist. The combination worked. Enough drones penetrated the defensive perimeter to inflict damage that made continued presence in that operational environment untenable. The commanding officer of the Ronald Reagan transmitted that assessment to Fleet Command. Fleet Command concurred, the battle group withdrew. Let's be precise about what that means strategically. This is not just a military event, it is a signal transmitted simultaneously to every government, every military, every strategic actor watching. The signal reads, the carrier battle group has limits in this specific geography, and those limits have now been found and demonstrated publicly. Within hours of the retreat, Iranian naval assets moved visibly into the strait's key navigation lanes. Formal inspection protocols for commercial shipping were announced. The message was unmistakable. Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz. Not theoretically, operationally. How did this capability exist? Where did it come from? Iran's serious drone development began in the early 2000s, but the program accelerated dramatically when Iranian forces recovered an intact American RQ-170 Sentinel stealth reconnaissance drone. The exact circumstances remain disputed. What is not disputed is that Iran's engineers studied that platform and understood something critical. They couldn't build what America builds, not under sanctions, not with their resource base, so they didn't try. Instead, they asked a different question, not how do we build the best drone, but how do we build the drone that defeats this specific adversary in this specific geography at a cost we can actually sustain? The answer was volume. Simplicity, swarm, piston engine instead of jet, cheaper, simpler, easier to manufacture at scale. Delta wing design optimized for range, not speed. Radar cross-section just small enough to complicate intercept without the cost of full stealth. Every choice was deliberate. These aren't compromises, they are a strategy. and the strategy was tested in real combat across Syria, Yemen, and Iraq before it was ever pointed at an American carrier. Every deployment generated data, what flight profiles work, how defense systems respond, where the gaps are. By the time Iranian planners drew up the Hormuz operation, they weren't theorizing. They were executing a doctrine refined over years of actual engagements against actual air defense systems. The naval adaptation required additional work. Maritime targets move. They carry their own point defense. There's no terrain to hide in. Iranian engineers solved each problem. Terminal guidance updates allowed drones to track a moving ship through their approach. Attack geometry was designed to force point defense systems to engage from multiple angles simultaneously rather than focusing on a single threat axis. Low-altitude approach profiles kept the drones beneath optimal radar detection range for as long as possible. The result was a system purpose-built to do one specific thing: defeat a carrier battle group in the Persian Gulf. It worked. Washington's response in the immediate aftermath carried every hallmark of a government simultaneously managing a public narrative and confronting a private strategic catastrophe. Statements emphasized repositioning, temporary, continued commitment to freedom of navigation, range of options under consideration, all technically accurate, all incomplete. The internal debate is harder. The options available to decision makers right now are genuinely bad. Option 1, surge additional assets and force a return to the operational area. Risk, a second engagement under identical conditions. The Iranian drone production capacity was not degraded. The defensive mathematics have not changed. A second retreat would be catastrophically worse than the first. Option 2, strike Iranian drone production facilities and launch sites directly. Risk, Iran's retaliatory toolkit is substantial. Missile strikes against American bases across the region. Mining of the Strait combined with anti-ship missile deployment. Activation of Iranian-aligned networks in Iraq and Syria against American personnel. Each escalation step in that sequence is harder to terminate than the one before it. Option 3, absorb the situation diplomatically while energy markets transmit the economic pain to allied populations. Risk, every week of disruption erodes the credibility of the American security guarantee that the entire regional order is built on. None of these options are clean. That's not an accident. Iran designed the operation specifically to create a situation with no clean American exit. The economic transmission is already underway. Oil moved in ways that haven't been seen in decades. LNG spot prices followed. Petrochemical feedstock costs hit manufacturing input prices within hours of market open. Every economy that imports energy just received an inflation shock, which describes basically every economy on Earth. Here is what the rest of the world is doing right now. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan are in emergency energy security assessments. These are American allies. They are almost entirely dependent on imported energy, with substantial portions transiting Hormuz. An extended disruption doesn't just create economic pain. It creates political pressure that pulls those governments toward accommodation with Iran regardless of what Washington prefers. Western Europe is processing a second major energy shock before it has fully recovered from the first. The political consequences in countries already dealing with energy cost pressures and government instability will be severe. China is watching from a different position. Beijing has spent years cultivating direct relationships with Gulf energy producers, specifically to reduce dependence on American-controlled transit routes. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement that China brokered, the expanding Chinese economic footprint across Gulf Cooperation Council states, the strategic reserves. These were preparation for exactly this scenario. China will absorb the cost of disruption through channels that don't require deference to American leadership. Russia doesn't need to do anything. Russian energy revenues expand automatically with every dollar crude oil prices rise. Every day Iranian control of Hormuz persists is a day Moscow's fiscal and strategic position grows relative to the Western powers absorbing the disruption. The multipolar order that analysts have been describing in theoretical terms for years is being written in operational fact through events exactly like this one. There is a deeper story underneath the weapon specifications. The drones that flew over Hormuz last night are the product of 4 decades of a nation deciding its sovereignty was worth defending regardless of cost. Sanctions restricted Iranian access to microelectronics, aviation technology, precision manufacturing components. The stated intent was to prevent exactly the kind of military development that has now happened. The sanctions imposed genuine economic pain. The Iranian people absorbed that pain in their living standards, in development foregone, in isolation from global innovation networks. What the sanctions did not produce was strategic capitulation. Every external constraint generated a corresponding internal investment in the indigenous capability that constraint was meant to prevent. No foreign semiconductors. Develop domestic production. No foreign aviation technology. Reverse engineer captured platforms. No precision guidance components. Build the manufacturing capability from the ground up. The drone that reached the Reagan's defensive perimeter last night is the physical product of that process. This is what a state looks like when it genuinely believes it is fighting for survival rather than managing a set of negotiable interests. It behaves differently. It absorbs costs that outside analysts consistently calculate should force a course change. It continues past red lines that outside observers treat as decisive. American strategic interests in the Gulf are real, but they are interests. They get weighed against other interests, against domestic political constraints, against cost calculations that democratic governments must perform continuously. When the cost of holding a position exceeds the political capacity to absorb it, democratic governments find ways to reframe and defer. Iran doesn't face this constraint in the same way. That asymmetry is what produced the behavioral pattern playing out on every screen right now. The fires on the Gulf are still burning. The Ronald Reagan is somewhere over the horizon. Its commanding officer is writing the after-action report that will reshape American naval doctrine for the next decade. The tankers that were transiting the strait when the operation began are sitting at anchor, waiting for clearance that has not come. In capitals from Riyadh to Tokyo to London, governments that built their security structures on the assumption of American naval dominance in the Persian Gulf are conducting urgent assessments of what a world without that dominance looks like. The answer to that question is being written right now, not in the halls of the Pentagon, not in Washington situation rooms, in the Strait of Hormuz, by 2,000 drones, and the carrier that turned away from them. This is not the end of American power, but it is the end of the assumption that American power in this specific geography is unconditional. That assumption held the global order together for 80 years. It fell last night, and every actor on the planet just watched it happen.